Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time after our 1 week hiatus. We enjoyed the time off around Father's Day. I hope that you had the opportunity to do the same with you and yours. Sorry that we didn't give you the heads up that was coming, but here we go. We're back. And I guess what I'm going to say, Alexis, who's joining me for today's episode. How you doing, Lex?
Good.
I guess we're going to say that even though we weren't here last week, we'll be here for you.
Yeah.
So if you hear, I'll be there for you. What pops into your head, Alexis?
That'd be this little TV show called Friends.
A little bitty TV show called Friends. So on your scale of 1 to 10 in terms of, 1, I don't care about it, to 10, I think it is culturally significant and I know every last detail about it. Where would you rank on the Friends 1 to 10 scale?
That'd be about a 50.
About a 50, yeah. The 10 doesn't actually contain the top end of that.
No.
As you might have guessed, Alexis is a friend of the TV show Friends. And so today we thought for today's episode it might be a fun thing just to explore one of our whimsy sort of what-ifs. And that's particularly true because what recently happened here in the latter part of May was HBO actually HBO Max aired that. I don't know if it actually aired on HBO or not. Hard to know what's actually on TV versus streaming services these days. But they actually aired something that some people had said would never actually
happen.
And what was it that happened?
That would be the reunion special.
The reunion special for Friends. Actually, the thing that popped into my head here, for those of you that are music fans of the 70s and 80s, you might remember a little group called the Eagles who did a reunion, and at one point they had made the comment that they would do a reunion when, quote-unquote, hell freezes over. And then they did a reunion and recorded it, so they entitled the album Hell Freezes Over. And so I don't think it was ever quite to that point with Friends, but there was a lot of discussion about why there would not be a reunion episode. But we're going to go a step further back. Not just why there wouldn't have been a reunion episode, but why there wouldn't have been a need in the first place at all.
Right.
For a reunion episode, because there wouldn't have been a Friends.
At all.
So that's what we're going to explore today here on What If. Explorations here on A Fork in Time. We ask you to join us when we come back from the break. We'll be back in a minute.
Would groceries delivered to you in as fast as 1 hour save you a trip to the store? Instacart makes that possible thanks to personal shoppers in your area who hand-select items based on your preferences from the stores you love. And shopping multiple stores is possible on a single order. Instacart picks the freshest produce and even keeps your eggs safe, all while finding everything you usually buy, providing smart suggestions for new items, and even highlighting deals to help you save money. And now you get free delivery on your first order over $35. Let Instacart know we sent you and help support our show by following the link in the show notes. Instacart. Groceries delivered in as fast as 1 hour.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Don sitting in the driver's seat, I guess more or less temporarily in the driver's seat. We may get to the stoplight here and have to change drivers, along with the.
We'll do a Russian fire drill.
Yeah, exactly. With the co-founder of the podcast and today's co-host, that would be Alexis. Just heard her voice there as we were coming back. So, Alexis, tell folks who may have been living under a rock for some point in the last 20 or 30 years. A little bit about this little TV show on NBC that premiered, I guess, in the...
It's 94.
Yeah, 1994. In September of 1994, called Friends.
So the premise of the TV show, which is a pretty simple premise, is it's 6 friends, and they're all living in New York City, and it's basically about that time in your early 20s, maybe right after you've graduated college, and are just kind of getting into the workforce. It's basically that period of your life where your friends kind of are your family. Now, of course, and we'll get into it a little bit as we kind of go through the episode, there are some family dynamics within the group of friends, but that's mainly the premise. It's a really simple premise of the show. It's these 6 people that are friends, living their life in New York City in that time, kind of between 20 and 30, when your friends are your family.
Okay, so when it premieres in 1994, it's pretty much an instant hit.
Pretty much, yeah.
But that's also a different landscape for television. So we're going to talk a little bit about the what did, because we have to talk about the what did before we talk about the what if. Maybe we should also create another companion podcast called the What Did Podcast.
That's the room where it happens.
That's sort of what the Room Where It Happens is, now that you mention that. By the way, still coming up, so stay tuned for the first episode of the Room Where It Happens. But again, you mentioned the premise for Friends. But 1994, yes, we're in the cable TV universe. We're not into the streaming universe yet.
No.
So, there's, we used to joke back during that period of time, like about the 200 or 300 channel universe, and now we have the almost
1,000 channel?
Infinite channel universe, it seems like. But this was still a period of time when there was a lot more dominance by traditional television and by network television, and the network sitcom was still there. So the situation comedy you've already described is that it's this group of New York City 20-something-ish friends, and the whole premise there sort of your friends are your family, that kind of thing. So as it premieres in 1994, it's hard to imagine that people wouldn't know who these actors or actresses are. But at that time, who was probably actually known? Well, let's talk about who the primary characters are. There are 6 friends.
Yes.
They are played by...
So, they are played by Jennifer Aniston. That's a popular name now. Courtney Cox. Arquette, thank you. David Schwimmer, Matthew Perry, Matt LeBlanc, and Lisa Kudrow.
Yeah, so those are the 6 friends. Now, they're cast of fairly well-known, in some cases, recurring characters, including some very, very popular...
Yeah, Tom Selleck, Maggie Wheeler, some very...
Elliot Gould.
Elliot Gould, Christina Pickles, some very prominent recurring characters, and also some pretty prominent guest stars. The 2 that popped in my head because it was an NBC show, Noah Wyle and George Clooney made a guest appearance from ER.
Back when they were still on ER. Again, also telling you how long ago Friends was actually on the air. But then you also had, sort of cameo appearances by the likes of, actually Oscar-winning actors in some cases.
Julia Roberts.
Brad Pitt. I'm trying to think of the name of... he played Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Sean Penn, that's who I'm trying to think of, appears on the show. Also dating myself there, really going back a ways. So, in fact, it sort of became a show that had the buzz of a lot of people wanted to make cameos or guest appearances or even recurring characters.
That was actually a thing that came up in the reunion special with Reese Witherspoon, who also made a guest appearance. She was like, of course I want to be on Friends. It's the show to be on.
Yeah, and so it was obviously an influential show. We're talking about it, and again, we don't need to feel like we need to talk too much about the historical what did, because if you've been alive in America or anywhere in the world in the last 30 years, you have seen this thing also tons of times on reruns and other places that it's appeared.
I have one person that's never seen an episode, but I'm going to change that.
Okay, we'll work on that. And I think that's a unique situation that you'll have the special chance to work on. So, runs for 10 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Produces, I guess, a total of... looking here, I've got the Wikipedia page up where I can try to pull...
It's 200 and something episodes.
Episodes, 236 episodes. And now is one of the premier things, I guess, that is being streamed on...
It's on HBO Max.
Yeah, and I think it's also... for some reason I want to think it's actually also being streamed on another important platform as well, but that's part of the reason why it was on HBO Max, is that they have the rights to do the streaming for that. So this influential show, you mentioned the cast. I think most of those have gone on to do at least one more thing on TV. Certainly if they haven't done one more thing on TV, they've done things in
film, for sure.
In film. But at the time, probably the most known of that cast of 6 probably would have been a competition for 2 of the 6. Definitely who played Monica, and that would, of course, be Courtney Cox. Courtney Cox probably was best known to most Americans who were TV fans at that time as one of 2 things. One of them being she was on... she played a recurring character and a love interest for the character played by Michael J. Fox on Family Ties. That was back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. She was the girlfriend. And then she was also known as the short-haired girl that danced in the Bruce Springsteen video. But so people would have said, even if they didn't know her name, they would have known. I know who she is.
I recognize her.
Yeah, and then the other one, I guess, probably would have been Lisa Kudrow.
Who had a recurring role on Mad About You.
Right, and actually they connected that in the sense that the recurring role that she had on Mad About You was her
twin sister.
So they were able to play that along and actually, I guess, do some things actually where the, acting in a camera or acting in a mirror almost kind of thing where she played herself and her sister on Friends.
Fun fact, they had to do that because Mad About You was also on Thursday nights on NBC.
Right. So at the time that it premieres, it's, first of all, getting a shot to be on Thursday nights, which was still a good place to premiere if you're going to be an NBC sitcom because of a long-running, although often changing series of shows that had sort of made Thursday night comedy on NBC an anchor thing for NBC. Right. And so Friends was lucky enough to land into one of those spots where it was going to get a lead-in audience and get some traction because of that. But certainly not a guarantee that it was going to be a hit, and certainly not the hit that it quickly became very early in the show's first season run.
Correct.
So that's a little bit, or most of the what did. Anything else you think that's super significant to talk about in terms of the what did, Lex?
I think that's the major points. It's very weird to me, not that Courtney Cox is not a famous actress, but to think that Courtney Cox was one of the most famous out of the six. It's very weird to cast my mind back to that.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, I was actually in my head. Maybe we've all done this. In fact, if you listen to the episode and have a chance, go to our Facebook page or even better, go to www.aforkintimepodcast.com. And there's a place to respond back to the posting that we put for each episode there. In the comments, just list your rank order the Friends. That's what I'm suggesting that you do. The criteria that you use to rank order the Friends is entirely yours and yours to choose. But I was actually thinking here, if you ranked essentially from 1 to 6 by either notoriety, previous work, recognition, any of those things, and you rank them now, that would be a different looking list.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and again, we may talk about that towards the end of the episode here, where we'll come back around and I'll ask Alexis to give her 1 to 6, and I may do my same as well. But probably a very fair thing to say that probably, at least in terms of, if no other reason than money earned during their career, probably after the show, hands down, Jennifer Aniston, if we go there.
Yeah, I'm going there.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, I'm going there.
Yeah, Matthew Perry made a couple of movies. Matt LeBlanc had a successful additional...
He had a spin-off series.
And then he also had an additional series, which actually was somewhat famous. Courtney Cox went on to do other things. David Schwimmer's actually appeared in some dramatic things in addition to doing comedy stuff. But probably, if you want to say who was vaguely known before and who was well known after, even in the first season, that's Jennifer Aniston.
Yes.
Including everybody needing to get their hair cut like her.
Yes, the Jennifer.
So that was the impact of the show in terms of the what did. It definitely launched and set financially for life a whole bunch of 6 people for sure.
Yeah.
So much so I guess that towards the end were they making like $1 million an episode a piece or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
They negotiated their deal together. So what we're going to do now is skip over to what we do here on A Fork in Time, which is not talk about the historical what did, but we're going to shift over and talk about the historical what if. So if we go back to this magical time, first of all, let's decide how we're going to do the point of departure. So is the point of departure is going to be that NBC just chooses to not pick the show up, or are we going to say, yeah, it premiered, but they put it in such a slot that it never gained an audience and thus never became the phenomena that we know now?
I don't think you can do that. I think, while there were a lot of things that went into making Friends the success that it was, the slot they got put into, being on a Thursday night, things like that, I think there was also kind of lightning in a bottle with Friends, so I don't think you can just completely say, oh, it was in some other slot and it just didn't pick it up. I think it would have eventually found its footing. So I think we're going to have to go with it just never got picked up for whatever reason. Timing didn't work out, budgets didn't work out. For whatever reason, NBC did not greenlight Friends.
Okay. And one of the things they actually talked about on the reunion episode of the reunion show was a cast that large, that's an ensemble cast. You may have some ideas about who you want to play this or you want to play that, but actually ending up with the six actors and actresses that they did to play Friends wasn't exactly an easy thing. They went through that whole story in the reunion special, talking about, well, so and so is under contract to do this, and so had agreed to do
That's
that
other thing.
Yeah, and so actually ending up with that particular match to shoot the pilot and to do the other things that they did, sort of a little story around that. Not going to steal the thunder of the reunion special on HBO Max. So we're just going to assume that it did not premiere. So obviously we can probably take the what if in two directions here, and that's what I'm going to suggest and do. One of them would be what might have happened to the cast. That's harder to know because they're actors and actresses. They probably would have found something to do. But more importantly, maybe just some of the cultural phenomena things. In other words, what would we not have from culture? So which one of those you want to do first?
Let's. I think the culture thing is gonna be a little more fun. I think we can go down that rabbit hole pretty far. So let's start with the actors and what they would have been doing.
Okay, so again, the known quantity at that point is Courtney Cox. This is before she's married, and this becomes Courtney Cox Arquette. What I actually have in my head is one of the episodes, one of the years, the credits when she had changed her name to Arquette, they put Arquette after the name of every member. So that was the thing that was running through my head, which is why I knew she was married
to David Arquette.
But that's the reason I remember that is because of that particular thing with the opening credits. So she had already made a little bit of a name for herself, a little bit of a splash. So what do you think is, now I'm purely speculating here, what is the career trajectory of Courtney Cox? Maybe Arquette, maybe not, for all we know at this point.
Oh boy. She had some success on Family Ties and things like that. So I could see her being, in another sitcom. What I don't know, because with Friends, and what was really unique was there wasn't really a lead. And they made that very deliberate. There was no lead, so to speak. So I guess the biggest thing I'm struggling with is, do these people lead their own shows? Because it's hard for me to kind of separate these people out into, oh, they obviously would have been a lead on another sitcom, or they obviously would have been a lead on a drama or something like that. It's, would have been kind of more like with the Family Tie scenario. She was playing a supporting role, she was a guest star, and kind of just doing that type work instead of like, oh, I'm leading my own show type thing. Because, and we'll get into this as we talk about the other ones, but there were other members of the cast that were leading their own shows. They just weren't as successful as Friends became. But with Courtney Cox, she was known, but it was more in the supporting roles.
So staying in the vein of the female portions of the ensemble.
The female leads.
Lisa Kudrow.
Same kind of thing. She was known for Mad About You. She played the waitress Ursula, which then becomes a character on Friends. So I'm having the same thing where it's like, does she just kind of play these supporting roles in different shows until she finally maybe finds, a show that is actually her own? That's really hard. I think because the dynamic of Friends was so much, there isn't a lead character, so it's kind of hard to cast my mind back and to say, like, well, obviously they would have become a lead character somewhere else, because it took the 10 years of Friends for them to really develop and you could see them as a lead character, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. What about Miss Aniston?
Well, she actually was on a show that they talked about during the reunion, because it was actually, it had a couple episodes that had already aired, so she took a risk when she did Friends. So I think she even said during the reunion, she was like, I was just going to keep doing pilots, and if they got picked up, I was going to work on them until they got canceled. So I think it would have been that. I see more her as kind of a leading role just because she was already doing that just on a show that was not quite as successful. Maybe Muddling Through would have stayed on.
Okay.
And Friends wouldn't have been a thing.
So,
Muddling Through would have been the Thursday night show.
Who knows? That would have been part of must-see TV.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember what NBC dubbed
Yes,
their
must see TV Thursday.
yeah, their thing that they're. So that's the gals. What about the guys?
Well, the first one that popped in my head is David Schwimmer, because David Schwimmer had actually given up broadcast acting, working on TV, working in films. He had actually gone back into theater, which is where he was trained. He was back in Chicago doing some theater work, so I think he would have just kept doing that. I think they kind of dragged him out and kind of not forced him, but convinced him to audition for Friends and to do Friends, and it became very successful. But I think there's no Friends. He's just a theater actor. Maybe he eventually ends up on Broadway. I think he's a good actor, so I could see that happening. But I see him going the theater route if Friends is not an option.
And the theater route wise, it's a legitimate acting route. In fact, some actors would argue that it's the more legitimate actor route. The thing about going the theater route is it's not quite. There are far fewer. Even the most popular Broadway actors are not as big as film and television stars. Right. And so, David Schwimmer might have had an incredibly diverse and successful career as a stage actor, and he could walk down the street and nobody would necessarily know who he was. So, that's certainly a possibility there. And then there's the two Matts or Matthews, as the case might be. So which one of those do you want to take first?
We'll do Matthew Perry. I've a soft spot for Chandler. That was his character on Friends. Matthew Perry, he's interesting because he's one of those people that I've actually seen. I've seen some movies and things like that he's done. He's done the dramatic stuff as well. Everybody else, for better or for worse, I kind of put into the comedic category, but I've seen him actually do both. So I can totally see him doing a sitcom, doing a drama, things like that. He was also on a show that was going to be about baggage handlers, if I remember correctly, in the future. It was a weird concept, from what I'm remembering, but who knows, that could have been a show, and if Friends hadn't become a thing. But he's one of those people that I could see him kind of doing both. I could see him doing drama, I could see him doing comedy, I could see him ending up in the lead role on a show. If Friends hadn't become a thing, I think it just would have taken a little longer.
Okay. And that leaves one more of the six. That leaves certainly not the last friend, right?
That leaves Matt LeBlanc, who's just the last one we're naming, but not the last friend. And I definitely see him comedy. Matt LeBlanc is 100% comedy, in my opinion. So I could see, and I mean, we do see this. He had the spin-off show from Friends, but then he also had the other show that I'm blanking on what it was called. But it had some success as well. So, but I definitely see him as definitely more of the comedy guy.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. He also was, I guess, his character was sort of intended to be sort of the hunky, good-looking guy. Yeah. So he was going to have that, sort of going for him probably no matter what. And it was the show was called Hiatus that he was actually on from 2006 to 2011. So that came right after the end of no, that's not what it was. Yes, it was. Sometimes when you jump into looking at a Wikipedia page while you're in the middle of recording, you get some goofy stuff. So it's fair to say that without Friends, the trajectories of six individual actors and actresses would have likely been very different. And as a result of that, also the trajectory, obviously, of NBC's success continuing, because this was later in the period of time. They had started, the must-see TV was still going on, but it was winding down a little bit more. This was actually post-Seinfeld. It took advantage of the Seinfeld Mad About You era of what was going on there, but this was moving. Seinfeld's about to go away. I guess that was in 98, if my memory serves, 98 or 99.
That sounds about right.
And so, what had become the sort of must-see NBC comedy stuff, going back to the 80s. This goes all the way back to the Cosby Show and some of the other big things that were when NBC started clustering a lot of their better comedies on Thursday nights to put that as a block of programming. Friends sustained that for a period of time. As that was drawing more towards its close, it sort of gave it another burst of energy.
Second life there.
Yeah, because again, that whole Thursday night comedy segment on NBC going back to the day was Cosby Show, its spinoff a different world for a period of time, but also Cheers, for example, Night Court. That's the '80s version of must-see TV comedy, if you will. Then morphed into the '90s version, and then with Friends carrying that a little bit, beyond the '90s and into the early 2000s that were there.
I also want to mention real quickly, because we talked about the trajectory of the actors on the show, the producers that are on the show. It's Marta Kaufman, it's David Crane. They're co-creators of the show, and then they've got another executive producer, Kevin Bright, that NBC took a chance on with Friends. And because of the success of Friends, they're actually able to launch 2 more shows that are not as long-lived, but Jessie, which starred Christina Applegate, and then Veronica's Closet, which starred Chrissy Alley, also on NBC. So if Friends hadn't had success, probably wouldn't have had those shows as well from those producers.
Right. So another good important thing to understand there. So Friends was impactful in the NBC's TV programming success trajectory. That's a given. It certainly had a big difference for the producers, as you just described. It had a big difference for the cast of actors. Gave some second life to some actresses and actors who appeared on the show that had, Marlo Thomas, for example, plays
Rachel's mom.
Rachel's mom. A known quantity, but that sort of gives her another lease on life. Elliot Gould, Christina Pickles, Tom Selleck in an entirely different role than what he'd been in before, and now he's gone off to, now he plays a New York City police commissioner or something like that on a show I've never seen, Blue Bloods. But so that whole impact on the individuals that are there. But really, Friends, I think the biggest thing that we would know differently, sort of like we've talked about with other things like this, it's the cultural impact, a little bit like our Disney episode, if you will. The cultural impact that it's hard to know what it had been, but we know what it is because of that. So what are some catchphrases
Oh, jeez, I knew you were going to ask this question.
that probably would not exist in our culture had it not been for example, could this be any more on the spot for you right now, for example? Who might I be imitating there?
That'd be our friend Chandler,
Yeah.
played by Matthew Perry. Well, I can't hear the word pivot without hearing Ross, so that's one. Pivot is one. You're my lobster is another one. Let's see. Regina Phalange is one. How you doing?
How you doing?
How you doing? I'm sorry, I did not do that justice, Matt LeBlanc. I apologize.
Which was Matt LeBlanc's character Joey's pickup line.
Yes, that was his pickup line for women. Let's see, what are some other ones? Oh man, I'm struggling now. And then I just have bits in my head, which again, we're watching the reunion special. There's an episode where Joey, played by Matt LeBlanc, puts on all of Chandler's clothes. He comes into the apartment wearing all of Chandler's clothes in an argument. So, things like that. There was a holiday episode where Ross, played by David Schwimmer, dresses up as a holiday armadillo to try and... He's Jewish, and so he's trying to teach his son about Hanukkah, but he's a little too late to get a Santa costume, so he has to get an armadillo costume. So it's phrases, but it's also just cultural references, like if I said holiday armadillo, or if I said, could I be wearing any more clothes? It's phrases like that are ingrained in our psyches now.
Yeah. So those types of impacts, again, we've had this type of thing before. I think it's tough to quantify. You don't know what would have taken its place, but
Right.
But society is impacted. The what if means that this would not influence there. So those are small things, but again, you can use those in company. The idea of sort of sarcastic approach that can often exist, for Chandler sarcasm, for example, in Tennessee, like to leave sentences unfinished as like a sarcastic bend and stuff like could I be any more? Could you be any more? Fill in the blank here. Those are there. So that's small things. Would society be far better off or far worse with or without them? The answer probably is no. Something else would have come along and taken its place. When we did an episode on the show talking about what if there had been no Star Wars. Well, we wouldn't be talking about the Force, but we would be talking about
Something else.
And that's definitely there. But the thing that also struck me was just the influence of that dynamic sort of being picked up in society. That's one of the things I remember reading something about, was this idea of this being like a lifestyle, a culture, a format of living for like 20 something as friends. Not that they invented it for the show, but sort of putting it out there in such a way that people recognized it or something like that. Do you have any thoughts about that? Does that make any sense?
No, I think it does. I think it, you're right. It was always a thing, especially I think if maybe you go away to college and so you're not living with your actual family, so your friends that are there become your family. So I think it was a thing, but I definitely think it did bring it into the forefront and make it more known of, we're away, we're living on our own, and our friends are our family. We see our families, but we don't see our families all the time, and that's okay. It made it more, not acceptable, but it made it more culturally aware.
Yeah. I'm just going to quote here something that was actually quoted in the Wikipedia article, which is it was developed an alternative family lifestyle. That's the word that they used to describe it. That it wasn't your biological family; it was the family that you sort of chose. And of course, it ended up that of the 6 characters, 2 of them were family, brother and sister.
Yes.
The Ross and Monica characters, played by David Schwimmer and Courtney Cox Arquette. But then you also had 2 of the characters or 2 sets of characters who married each other.
Well, one of them kind of.
Well, they married each other. They didn't, but they're going to be together in the end. Is what you presume is actually going to happen here. And so that dynamic too of the friendships turning into romantic relationships, and even a big part of a couple of seasons there when it's the connection that happens between Chandler and Monica, is that okay? What do you do when your friend becomes a romantic thing, and how do you deal with that? And dealing with that whole thing,
and how do you deal with that in the group too?
Right, the group dynamic, the individual dynamics. In that case, the brother-sister dynamic, because of one of the being the sister of the brother, now the best friend who's now that whole dynamic.
Yeah, who's also the former roommate from college of the brother.
Right, that whole thing is also I think the way that plays out, and again the influence of that on culture and people recognizing that and seeing that is part of what's out there.
Definitely, I agree.
And so that's an impact of a show like that. The other thing that jumped out at me is it's the 90s and it's a sitcom, and so what are we going to have as one of the sets?
A coffee house?
A coffee shop, or a coffee house, because that was obviously a central thing. A central thing being Central Perk, which was the name of the coffee house that was one of the standard sets that were there. They sort of had 2 places where you found the set pieces for conversation among the friends. Sitting in the living room of Monica's apartment, or sitting in the essentially public living room, which was, for some reason, all the best sofa and seats inside of this coffee shop were magically reserved for
just them
in the middle of the coffee shop.
And occasionally Rob Schneider and Robin Williams.
Yeah, which is sort of weird there. But I was thinking about Frasier, which also has a coffee shop theme or coffee, and of course that's a common theme throughout a lot of sitcoms, is to have a public place. Cheers has a bar, Cafe Nervosa, that's the name of the coffee shop on Frasier. Central Perk, so that was a thing there. But I began to wonder, if there is no Friends, how popular is Starbucks?
Not as popular, I'm gonna guess. That's an interesting concept. But yeah, you are right. I think Friends and other shows, Frasier, Cheer, there is always kind of that meeting place, but it galvanized that, and it made it cool.
Yeah,
to just sit in a coffee shop for hours and just talk.
Yeah, the idea that people were like, we need to find our version of Central Perk, and that most likely might be the Starbucks down the street. I don't know. I'd have to go back, and I didn't do the research on this because I didn't think about this before the episode. But how much of that influenced, if you will, was that already a trend that was sort of going? I think the answer to some degree is yes. But was it quite the trend that it became? I think the answer is no. So, maybe you would see a couple of fewer Starbucks on a couple of fewer corners here, there, or everywhere if it had not been for Friends. What else would be different if there were no Friends?
Oh man. Well, the other thing that just popped in my head when you were talking about, the meeting places and where people went is, it was kind of a joke that they never went to work. They all had jobs, and you would see them at work on different things and in different episodes, but it was multiple times. It's like they're all sitting in the coffee shop, and it's like, I should probably get to work. So that's just another thing that's a little thing that popped in my head, but it's it's just that cultural thing of like, I don't know, but it was just the whole thing. It's like, oh, we should probably get to work.
Yeah, and while you knew something about each one of the cast members' jobs, Monica was
She was a chef.
Ross was a paleontologist. So lots of dinosaur jokes that would come from there. Matt LeBlanc's character Joey was an actor, so that's sort of turning things back around on itself. Lisa Kudrow was
she was a massage therapist,
but also sort of the flake of the group in that sense. And then of course the other two were Rachel, who was initially sort of comes as spoiled rich kid with no job, but then develops into a fashion career kind of thing. But the one that jumps out at me is along what you're talking about, which is sort of Chandler. Which is like,
do we know what he does?
Do we know what Chandler does, right? He works for some type of company that does some kind of data processing, data entry, but it's almost like we don't know what Chandler does. We're not even sure that Chandler knows what, Chandler does. And I think that was sort of emblematic of what you were talking about, which was this idea of, the job is just superfluous to everything else.
But I think that kind of galvanized in the culture maybe. And maybe this was what I was trying to get at, is it galvanized that what you do is not who you are.
Right.
Like it's part of who you are. We knew what these people did. We kind of knew what Chandler did, but it wasn't who they were. We didn't think about them as, oh, Monica's the chef, Phoebe's the massage therapist, Rachel's in fashion. We thought about them in relationship to who they were to each other.
Right.
So it was Ross is Monica's brother. Ross and Rachel are together. Chandler and Monica are together. We thought of them in relationship to each other, and the job was just a detail.
Right. And the other thing I think that goes with that, which is why I talk about it, the influence of Friends is that a lot of other TV at that point, situation comedies, often revolved around a workplace. And
Frasier?
The workplace was a major part of that. It's not that we didn't get to visit all of the workplaces of each of the primary characters in Friends, but it was not around a workplace. A lot of sitcoms had been intentionally built around a workplace environment. Mm-hmm. The Mary Tyler Moore Show going back to the day, and what else? You mentioned one, Frasier, the radio station, and Cheers even to a degree. It's the bar. People were working at the bar. Even though that doubled as sort of the social construct as well, which worked brilliantly for
Well, multiple characters also work at Central Perk throughout the show. Well,
that's true too. That's where Rachel ends up with her. So, in fact, the irony there is that she's sort of at her job, but she's not even doing her job well because she's not paying attention to the job because she's paying attention to her friends. And I think that whole dynamic as well of sort of saying again, as you pointed out, it's not about what you do, it's about who you're connected with or who you're connected to that made the difference there. And I think that was an influence on Friends. I think, in fact, I remember seeing this, I guess, in the reunion special and other things I remember reading about the show is part of the magic of the show is almost anybody who watched the show identified with one or more of the characters in some way because it was a diverse group, and also identified with, they either had a group of friends like that or wanted a group of friends like that. Or maybe both at the same time. So I think that's another element of the cultural impact of the show, in that it sort of, gave identity to things either people were looking for or maybe that they already had, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
All right. Can you think of anything else?
Oh. I mean, that'd be a weird... First of all, I'd have a very empty bookshelf because I have all 10 seasons of the show on DVD.
Right. Before streaming was cool, you could go back and watch. Well, the other interesting thing about that to me, this is weird maybe to think about, but I'm thinking about naming conventions for episodes and shows, which is also really odd, in the sense that what they used for Friends was normally it was the one
With blank.
blank, whatever, and there's something related to that. But again, you didn't necessarily know what that episode was, but yet people know what those episodes are because of the way that the phenomena spread throughout media and culture. Friends changed in some ways the way that I think that people consumed that type of TV show in terms of understanding sort of its backstory as well, if that makes any sense. Well, again, here on A Fork in Time, we don't always have to delve into deep philosophical, massive historical, collapse of civilization type of events. Sometimes we talk about 6 people in
Sitting on some couches in a coffee shop.
in New York City.
Which is really in LA. But, you know.
Well, who's counting? All right. So once again, we thank you for joining us here on A Fork in Time today, the Alternate History Podcast. Come back next week and we'll actually talk about some real history, and we hope that you do that. Lex, we alluded to it. We alluded to it.
It's Friday when we're recording.
Yeah. We alluded to it, and maybe we should actually go into it a little bit more. We mentioned it a couple of times, but here in the next couple of weeks, the first episode of The Room Where It Happens will premiere. So anything you want to say to our listeners about our podcast number 2?
So we alluded to it earlier. So that's going to be mainly focusing more on the what did of history. We're still going to be doing the what ifs on this podcast on A Fork in Time, but if you want some what dids in history, we invite you to tune into The Room Where It Happened. And that's mainly going to be focusing around, as you could probably guess from the title, historic places and rooms where things happen. Now, those rooms can be big or they can be small, but we're going to be focusing on some events and the historic places that they occurred. And I know I've got some ideas for some episodes. I know Dad has some ideas for some episodes. But our goal with that podcast is to not be producing episodes all the time.
Right.
And
we've actually got a group of about 7 or 8 folks that are part of the team for The Room Where It Happened. And so we're excited about that as well, and about growing out the number of folks who get to participate in things. The only other thing I want to mention is something, again, that we are doing that is connected to A Fork in Time, and that's over on Patreon, where we have released the first episodes that relate to the special series that we're doing there. And that special series is on the Late Bronze Age collapse. Now, if you want Falls of Civilization, you want the exact opposite of what we're talking about here on our Friends episode, that is the thing for you. But that's going to be available just only to those that support us and are part of our patron family there on Patreon. So if you're interested in doing that, there are links here in the show notes that'll let you know how to go over and become a patron. The other thing there is we've actually set up a special patron level that's intentionally designed for folks that want to go participate. Very, very low financial commitment associated with that, just for the run of that particular show. So it'll automatically, if you choose to become a patron there, that will automatically come to an end unless you choose a different option at the end of the run of the Late Bronze Age collapse. And again, we chose to do that over there partly because it deserved a long run of episodes and didn't want to muddy the normal podcast stream with a whole bunch of that or spread it out over time. But to me, it's also one of the most fascinating periods of time in terms of thinking through the just plethora of historical what ifs. As I've been doing research and listening to other podcasts and doing other things there to learn more about these cultures and civilizations that were all wrapped up in that, each one of those is almost worthy of its own little deep dive into the world of what's happening there. It's pretty deep and pretty rich stuff. So if you're interested in that, you can listen to that. Those will be found exclusively over on the feed that's available to anyone who is part of our patron group there on Patreon. Anything else you want to say before we close out, Lex?
Just that I've missed doing podcasting. I've alluded to this before, but it's still happening. I got a lot going on in my life. I have a thing on my finger that didn't have the last time I recorded.
I was going to ask if you were going to mention that. So the thing on your finger is what?
That'd be an engagement ring.
That would be an engagement ring. So the congratulations are going now from me formally here on the podcast to my daughter for getting engaged. I feel fairly safe in saying, based upon what I've learned of my future son-in-law's personality and his let's just say, lack of a talkative nature, that we're never going to see Jake lured on to being a guest on the episode. That's even if we picked whatever topic would be of most interest to him. But not exactly his jam, to say the least, I don't think.
Well, he's definitely the quiet one in the relationship.
He's definitely the quiet one in the relationship. That'd probably be true with anyone that Alexis is in a relationship with, but especially for Jake. So we welcome Jake to the family and soon to be part of the family, but also congrats to Alex on her engagement. And that will be her excuse for not doing much with the podcast over the next 6 to 8 months as things are leading up towards the wedding.
I'm gonna be on though. I'm gonna be back.
Yeah, she says she's gonna do more podcast episodes. So again, once again, we thank you guys for joining us. We really do appreciate the fact that we have a listener group that supports us as well as you do. Some of you might not have listened to this because it's not your traditional historical cup of tea. We know from feedback that some of you actually love these kind of episodes and wish we would do more of them. We can't do everything in every episode every week, so we try to alternate around these things. Again, lots of cool stuff here during the summer as we go through the summer and some of the topics that we've got laid out. If you have topical suggestions, give them to us. I actually have up on the screen here in front of me now our topical queue, which is in the double digits, well into the double digits. Some of those are going to find their way over to the room where it happened in some way. Some of them will be here on Fork in Time, the What If podcast.
But the great thing, though, is we can double dip.
Yeah, in fact, there are some cool double dips that can actually happen there. So we welcome your suggestions. Your suggestions tend to be much better than our suggestions because we have a tendency to go back to the same places over and over again. Not saying where that is geographically in the United Kingdom, and not saying where that is in historically
Tudor England.
But other than that, we get around a little bit, which is also why we did the Late Bronze Age collapse thing, to go someplace totally different. Although we're doing that on a different channel, so to speak. All right. Once again, thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for your patronage. If you want to learn more about the podcast, visit the website, www.aforkintimepodcast.com, and ask you to come back next week, where we'll come back and talk about something entirely different. And, we're obliged. If our listeners are going down the road and happen upon, just by accident, happenstance, a Fork in Time, any tangible suggestions for them?
I think you should take it.
Take it. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.